Teresa Skubic, and this is Forum Daily for Tuesday, December 17th. Former Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison, who served from 2018 to 2022, says Sunday's attack was driven by anti-Semitism that he argues has been allowed to grow in Australia since the October 7th attacks in Israel. In a statement, Morrison said anti-Semitism was the loaded weapon at the center of this terrorist crime. He called for a review of all relevant security laws and operational practices, while cautioning that such a review should not distract from what he described as the primary cause of the attack. And this morning, Australia's Federal Police Commissioner has confirmed that the mass shooting at Sydney's Bondi Beach was a terrorist attack inspired by the Islamic State group.
There has been reports in the news about our two offenders travelling to the Philippines last month. I can confirm that they did travel to the Philippines. The reasons why they went to the Philippines and the purpose of that and where they went when they were there is under investigation at the moment. I also confirm that the vehicle, which is registered to the younger male, contained IEDs, but I also confirm that it contained 2 homemade ISIS flags. We continue to work through the motive of this tragedy, and we'll continue to do so. And I think it's really important that our investigators continue to be given time to do that. This is a very complex investigation and important that we do it thoroughly.
These are my first public comments on the terrorist attack since I have returned to Australia. And I want to describe this attack in my own words so there is no confusion and no ambiguity about the AFP's position. This was a barbaric attack against Jewish Australians. On Sunday, Jewish Australians were hunted down in broad daylight at an iconic Australian beach. The suspected murderers, callous in how they allegedly coordinated their attack, appear to have had no regard for the age or ableness of their victims. It appears the alleged killers were interested only in a quest for a death tally. Like October 7, 2023, we will not forget how that shocking attack forced Jews around the world to relive modern-day terror that should have been consigned to the history books decades ago. In Australia, the AFP will never forget the date of December 14 and what it means for a community that deserves to live in peace and harmony. Early indications point to a terrorist attack inspired by Islamic State, allegedly committed by a father and son. There is no evidence to suggest other individuals were involved in this attack. However, we caution that this could change given it is early in our investigation.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was asked whether radical Islam poses a growing problem in Australia and why hate-filled rhetoric continues to be allowed to spread.
As part of the investigation, it goes to motive and what is being investigated, as the Commissioner has said, is that it would appear that there is evidence that this was inspired by a terrorist organisation, by ISIS. Now, some of the evidence which has been procured, including the presence of Islamic State flags in the vehicle that has been seized, are a part of that. Radical perversion of Islam is absolutely a problem. It is something that has been identified globally as a problem as well. ISIS is created by an evil ideology that has been called out not just by the Australian government but globally as well.
Israel's ambassador to Australia said that he had been vocal about the dangers of rising anti-Semitism over the past 4 years, as he expressed his grief for the deadly mass shooting in Sydney.
I'm not that sure that my vocabulary is rich enough to express how I feel. My heart is torn apart because the Jewish community, the Australians of Jewish faith, the Jewish community is also my community, my people. The people that were brutally murdered here are people that I've known, I've met, and I'm here today, first and foremost, to be here with my friends, my community.
To discuss the wider impact of rising anti Semitism and what it means for Jewish communities in Australia and beyond, we're now joined by Australian Israeli journalist Asher Westrop Evans. Asher, thank you so much for the time today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I want to start with what we actually know about the shooters and their immigration status. There has been a lot of information flying around on social media. Do you mind just breaking down what we know at this point and where these shooters are actually from?
So this is the father and son, Akram. These men themselves, there's been a lot of speculation going back and forth. Statements have come that they came in from Hyderabad, but they've been in Australia for a considerable period of time. Obviously going so far as to having obtained gun licenses, which, as we say, is not an easy feat in Australia, a country where such licenses are strictly limited. They're meant to be only to those who have passed a fit and proper person test, a test of character, criminal record, and background. So, these men had been declared by authorities in some ways, at least the father certainly had been declared to be fit and proper members of the community. Obviously, a gross miscalculation. That being said, as we're seeing coming to light now, there were ASIO, that's Australia's Domestic Intelligence Service, investigations put out against these men, against the son, in order to check and make sure that his associations weren't there going as far back as 2019, which had been dropped for the time being. Obviously, a huge mistake on the part of Australia's authorities.
And since the October 7th attacks in Israel, have you seen a noticeable change in the tone or frequency of anti Semitic incidents in Australia?
Certainly, and that's well documented. There's been multiple reports that have come out about the increase in anti-Semitic attacks in Australia, and obviously we only have to look at the key incidents even over the last couple of years, from the multiple fire bombings that have occurred at synagogues and other various places of worship in Sydney and Melbourne, the two major centres of Jewish life in Australia. Of course, attacks on kosher kitchens, graffiti that was placed. Even just a few months ago, we'd seen graffiti go up around Bondi Beach area, targeting the IDF, Israel, Jews explicitly, and calling them out in a very threatening language. But this language, this rhetoric was ignored. And this is exactly what we're seeing. We've seen Australian Jewish leaders come out and state that it's the sort of violence of words that leads to graffiti, that leads to verbal assaults, that leads to physical assaults, and eventually to the sort of mass murder events that we saw on Bondi so sadly last Sunday.
And the former Prime Minister Morrison says that anti Semitism has been allowed to flourish. In your view, who bears responsibility for actually confronting this issue? Is it political leaders, law enforcement, social media platforms, or all of the above?
I think as with any situation like this, when you're dealing with such heinous attacks, I think everyone bears a degree of responsibility, but that doesn't mean that anyone is let off responsibility. Certainly, obviously, the current government, Anthony Albanese himself, the government he leads, is responsible, having been in power, over the course of these last several years, to take responsibility and to take the attacks that have targeted the Jewish community seriously. And there obviously has been a lack. Now, obviously, this attack was a black swan event. No one would have predicted in a country like Australia that is famous for having removed firearms by and large from the community back in 1996, that anyone would have expected this sort of attack to occur. But the fact that this sort of hate was allowed to fester, the fact that ISIS cells are still able to operate in Australia, and as we've seen from ASIO director Mike Burgess coming out in statements he made earlier in the year, there has been a marked switch in Australia from focusing on Islamist and jihadist terrorism as a primary focus of Australia's intelligence services onto more of a focus on right-wing extremism at the expense of the sort of Islamist terrorism that has then been allowed to fester. And clearly this was a huge failure from intelligence services, and obviously the buck must stop with political leaders.
Well, when attacks like this happen, some focus quickly shifts to security laws. Do tougher laws actually address the root problem, or does that risk ignoring the ideology behind the violence?
I think both can occur at the same time. Whether we talk about tougher gun laws in particular, and again, Australia is famous for taking the approach of zero tolerance to guns within the community, and whatever one's views on that are, there has been a clear and marked result from that up until the horrific attacks we saw on Sunday, the likes of which had not occurred in Australia to that degree in almost 30 years. And then of course we can need to talk about immigration policies and status, who is being allowed in this country, how they are being monitored into Australia, those that come in, and checked, the sort of background checks that are being done to ensure that bad actors, that terror actors, that those who would wish to commit harm to the community are not certainly being allowed in. And then even if they are, slipping through the net, which, obviously you're not going to catch every single person, but at the same time, if they are slipping through the net, they then need to be monitored closely to make sure that once they're in the community, they're not able to cause this level of harm. The fact that a man should be able to get hold of 6 high-powered rifles, shotguns, and the sort of weaponry that he had
Sorry,
available that
Asher, I
allowed for...
do I do just have to interrupt you.
Mhm.
We do have to go to commercial break, but we will pick this conversation up right after these messages.
Of course.
Asher, thank you for being back with us.
Pleasure.
Now, some are comparing the shooting to the Charlie Hebdo massacre and noting a major gap in the collective response. Do you agree that there is a comparison here?
I mean, of course, there are comparisons. Obviously, a lot of the hateful Islamist ideology that underpins the attackers obviously shares an ideological background. But I would say actually that there is a clear distinction here, which is it comes in the form of the anti-Semitic, and I will actually just use the clearer term, which I think gets across more clearly, the Jew hatred that is perpetuated here. This targeting of a community for their faith, their ethnicity, their cultural background, as they openly worship freely on Bondi Beach. I mean, this is removed from any of the sort of political rhetoric which may be tied into the Charlie Hebdo massacre, an event that occurred there. I mean, this is just people who are freely worshipping and are being targeted simply for their faith, not for their political ideology, not for their particular affiliation, but simply for being Jews, for daring to exist with this particular faith and framework. And I just think that puts this in another level of hate.
And we know that the government of Australia has said that it would tighten its gun laws. Is that likely to have a meaningful impact, or does something else need to happen here?
Certainly, if that's all that's intended, then that fails to deal with the key issue, which is the need to root out these hateful, heinous ideologies, root and stem from the Australian community. That being said, I think, as plans stand now, clearly the government was caught off guard in this situation and didn't have the plans ready in place to address sort of the wider issues. If they start with tackling gun laws, so be it, so that these immediate problems are dealt with on the street, but then the deeper issues and the harder work needs to be undertaken, and that really needs to be about rooting out this ideology completely.
Well, and on that, how should this attack change the national conversation around anti Semitism, not only in Australia, but globally going forward? I mean, we've seen increased attacks since October 7th. What needs to change here?
I mean, I think this has really galvanized certainly the Jewish community, but also, allies of the Jewish people around the world in understanding that this sort of hate is really festering, is malignant, and really is touching all corners of the earth. I mean, I think there's a sort of narrative now proven false that Australia was this sort of peaceful paradise island in an ocean of calm far off in the corner of the world where these sort of things didn't happen. And this has really broken that down for people, really shattered that mold, and made people realize that this sort of hate can touch Jews anywhere in the world. And the sort of Jew hatred that is being perpetuated and that was perpetuated in the wake of October 7th and the heinous massacre of Jewish people by Hamas terrorists that we saw there, that this has now festered throughout the entire world, and many have felt empowered. Many who believe in these ideologies feel empowered to attack Jews freely and almost without impunity, and that cannot continue, whether that be in person with guns or whether that be part of the hateful online rhetoric that we see every day that just perpetuates these heinous narratives and allows these sort of psychopaths to, develop these ideologies in secret, in hiding behind their screens before it bursts out into the public and harms people directly.
Well, Asher, thank you so much for having this conversation with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And the search continues for the person seen in a grainy surveillance video walking away from the shooting at Brown University that left 2 students dead and 9 others injured. Police said late Sunday that they released a person of interest who had been detained earlier in the day, determining there was no basis to hold him. The decision leaves investigators without a confirmed suspect. The shooting occurred Saturday during a busy period on campus, triggering panic and an extended lockdown. At a news conference on Monday, authorities released 3 new surveillance videos, and officials say it offers the clearest images so far of the individual that they are trying to identify.
He's going to be wearing dark clothing. You're not going to be able to see his face. Dark gray or black clothing. And some of the witnesses have also told us that he may have been wearing a camouflage gray mask. That is unconfirmed. But if anybody should recognize this person in any way, seen him earlier, recognize his gait, obviously we want to know about that as soon as possible.
And back at home, the federal Liberals are hinting at the possibility of more floor crossings following last week's crossing of Ontario MP Michael Ma. When asked whether other opposition MPs might be preparing to join the Liberals, Energy Minister Tim Hodgson said he's receiving lots of inquiries.
The word on the street is that you played a vital role in recruiting Marco Ma over to the party from the Conservatives. Can you tell us a little bit, maybe expand on some of those conversations you had?
So about the mass timber. Let me say that our Prime Minister is a former businessman and a pragmatist. I'm a former businessman and a pragmatist. Michael Ma is a former businessman and a pragmatist. We all share a view that it is a time to unite, not to divide. And I'll let Michael speak for himself, but the Liberal Party is proud to have him as a new caucus member.
You're one away from a majority now. Do you think you can convince more to come over? Is there some people ready to defect?
Let's say I'm getting lots of inquiries.
Ma's move from the Conservative caucus to the Liberals brought the government within just one seat of a majority, just hours after he attended the official opposition's Christmas party. And Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says Prime Minister Mark Carney's government is practicing counterfeit conservatism. Poilievre says while Carney likes to copy his ideas, ending the carbon consumer price, for example, his government won't do what it says it will. Carney is widely seen to be moving the Liberals to the political center after years of more center-left policies under former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And Ontario Premier Doug Ford has announced a plan to double the number of visitors to the Niagara region by attracting multiple casinos, a new theme park, and more. Ford says he wants to see twice as many annual visitors as the current 13 million who visit Niagara Falls, and envisions more casinos, a theme park, an electric tram with views of the falls, and an observation wheel like in London.
Today, I'm thrilled to announce our government Destination Niagara strategy, a multi-billion-dollar plan to build new world-class attractions, elevate Niagara's casino and gaming experience, meaning we want more casinos, big, large casinos, to come here, boost, and we are doing that. So all the big casinos in Niagara, I'm making a clear message to you, you're welcome to Niagara. Boost local arts and culture and improve the region's transportation network with the ambitious goal of attracting 25 million annual visitors and generating $3 billion of additional revenue for Niagara every year. We want to double the number of visitors who come to Niagara every year, and we want to double the amount of time that they spend in Niagara, enjoying all it has to offer and supporting the local economy. Our strategy is built on 5 pillars, and I'll just run through them. First, we're going to build new must-see attractions. Imagine a theme park with rides and games and all-new Niagara River line with an electric tram running 3.8 kilometers through Queen's Victoria Park with unmatched views of Niagara Falls. We're working with private investors in Niagara Parks to revitalize the marina at Miller's Creek into a quality recreation destination and working to develop an observation wheel just like those in London and Las Vegas that will overlook the falls. All these attractions will draw people from around the world, helping families and children make memories that will last a lifetime. We're also looking to grow Niagara's gaming market. One of the options being explored is the potential development of multiple new world-class casinos to provide more options for visitors, encourage the development of new hotels, entertainment venues, and restaurants, boosting the economy and helping create tens of thousands of good jobs.
And Premier Doug Ford says he won't be traveling to Florida for the holidays this year, marking the first time he's stayed in the province for the season. Speaking at a Monday press conference, Ford encouraged other Canadians to make their own travel decisions, but he emphasized the benefits of supporting local tourism.
Yeah, so let me tell you, it's going to be the first time I'm not going to Florida. But I talked to so many people. Don't let this guy, Trump, determine and ruin your life and everything. That's my personal choice. Maybe some families have gone to Florida their whole lives. Go to Florida. You know, that's great. But I encourage you to stay here and support local tourism. But you can't let the one tyrant change your lives, right? You just can't let it happen. I'm doing it out of my own personal choice because I just can't do it. But don't let this guy change your lives. If you go down and you see, you know, maybe their grandparents are down there, maybe they're somewhere else. So we'll get through this. But they're hurting down there right now. They're hurting on all fronts. They're hurting on their economy. President Trump is at the lowest rating that any president has been in the first year, and God knows probably 100 years. So it's taking effect. And I always say, we love our American friends, and the Americans love Canadians. And there's just one guy I just don't see eye to eye with us, President Trump. So we'll keep fighting. And I'll never apologize to that guy, ever, ever.
Coming up after the break, Canadian Blood Services is aiming to become more self-sufficient in meeting the needs of patients, and I'll be joined by our contributor, David Clement, to break all this down. After that, we'll have more of today's top national and international headlines. Forum Daily News will be right back after these messages. Canadian Blood Services is aiming to become more self-sufficient in meeting the needs for patients with cancer and immune system disorders. 70% of Canada's supply of immunoglobulin comes from outside the country and is mostly from the U.S. The drug is made from donated plasma, and demand is rising every year. Canadian Blood Services CEO Dr. Graham Scher says that the goal is for 50% of our immunoglobulin drug to be completely made in Canada in the next few years. I'm now joined by our contributor, David Clement, to discuss this further. Now, David, you've actually written about this subject nationally, going back as far as 2018. How reliant are we on plasma from the U.S., and why is that the case?
Yeah, so we're about 70% reliant on the U.S. So it's plasma and plasma therapies. So plasma is what's taken out of the body. Plasma therapies are the drugs that are used to help burn victims, people with just various disorders, cancer, you name it. So we are about 70% reliant on the United States, and the fundamental reason about why we're reliant on the United States is that they have a massive supply, and they have a massive supply because they pay donors. And that is something that was generally frowned upon in Canada for a long time. And that seems to be one of the only mechanisms to actually drastically increase supply, is to offer some sort of honorarium or remuneration when people do go to donate plasma.
Now, you mentioned donors in the United States actually getting paid. Where is Canada at with paying donors?
So it's complicated. So some provinces proactively banned paid plasma. So if you go back 20, 30 years, there was a tainted blood scandal that created a lot of worry or concern about the integrity of the donation system. And so you had provinces like Alberta at the time, Ontario, and several others ban the practice of paying donors for plasma. Now, there was an interesting loophole or caveat in the Act of Parliament that set up the Canadian Blood Services Agency. Mm-hmm. And that was, it is permitted to pay for plasma if it's contracted through CBS. And so quite recently, CBS has partnered with Grifols, which is a huge multinational in the business of collecting plasma. And so they operate now 16 clinics across the country, which get to actually exist irrespective of the provincial laws prohibiting it. So it's not a full-scale adoption of compensating donors for plasma across the country, but it is starting to chip away at the old mindset that we couldn't compensate donors as part of the process to try and generate more supply.
And would you say that paying donors potentially crosses an ethical line? I mean, if someone is strapped for cash and they're looking for a way to make quick money, well, I'm just going to go donate some plasma.
Yeah, I mean, there's two counters to that argument. So compensating somebody for something doesn't make it not altruistic, right? So the nurse in a hospital is paid for her services. It doesn't mean she's any less altruistic because she happens to have a salary. She's still doing incredible work and saving lives. The brain surgeon who saves somebody's life and removes a tumor is paid probably rather well in comparison to average Canadians. That's okay. It doesn't make their work any less heroic or noble or honorable. And then the second aspect to this is if it truly crossed an ethical line, we wouldn't import it from the US because that's where donors are paid. And this was a lot of the hysteria in the conversation about the CBS partnership with Grifols, is people would claim, well, it's unethical. Well, if it was really unethical, we wouldn't import plasma therapies from the United States where they pay their donors.
But I mean, if it's something that people are desperate for, I mean, we need plasma. Does that remove the ethical value of it just because it's something that you need, or should ethics always be considered?
Yeah, I mean, I think the is it ethical argument fails because at the end of the day, the purpose of the entire collection system is to treat patients. And so whatever it is that increases the supply that we need, that makes us less reliant on a single source, is a good thing. And I don't see any moral objections to compensating someone. I mean, we're not talking about wildly inflated sums of money. We're talking about anywhere from $70 to $100 per donation. You are limited in terms of how many times you can do it per month. And so it's not predatory in any way like that. But we do actually see, surprisingly, in the US, we see some very positive externalities where in communities where these plasma clinics exist and are compensating people, you actually see reductions in crime and you see reductions in payday lender use. So the high interest engagement in the lending system. And so I don't see any real moral objections to compensating donors because at the end of the day, if we're relying on paid donors in the US, what's the argument for not paying donors here? Other than to maybe try and sit on a moral high ground and pat ourselves on the back. But at the end of the day, the therapies that we're using in Canada are coming from paid donors.
And are there potentially safety concerns with the plasma that is collected?
No, not anymore. Not anymore. That goes back as a very, very dated criticism. And we saw this pop up when this was kind of a national conversation in 2018, 2019, because people would invoke the tainted blood scandal, which was, of course, tragic and horrific. But the technology for how they treat plasma and what they screen for eliminates almost all of those risks, with very few exceptions. And so I would liken it to when we misguidingly prohibited gay men from donating blood for so long. And it was based off of really outdated, some would argue homophobic views going back to the 80s. The arguments on safety for plasma collection now mirror that argument. It's just very old and very stale, and the science has progressed so much so that almost all of those concerns have been dealt with just by being able to screen candidates for donation properly, but also being able to screen and treat the samples that are provided in the donation process.
Well, and you mentioned that paid plasma clinics are linked to lower rates of crime and the use of payday loans. Could you walk us through how those are actually connected?
Yeah, so essentially what happens is if you have someone who is struggling to make ends meet, and what are they going to do to, let's say, be able to make rent? And in many instances, that can be a couple $100s. The first kind of easy option for them is to get an advance on a paycheck. That's usually done through a payday lender. The interest rates on that are much higher than a traditional loan. Some have argued that that setup is predatory. It's preying on low-income people, et cetera. It creates a cycle of debt. But what happens if someone has an extra $100 in their pocket at the end of the week because they donated plasma, they're less likely to go to a payday lender for that $100. And then the next level below that is if a payday lender isn't an option for you, petty crime can fill the void, people stealing things, trying to pawn them off. And again, what we see in these communities in the US is a reduction in that type of petty crime because they don't need to. All right. Most people are, unless you're a serial offender who's in a criminal network that profits perpetually off of theft. Most people are stealing to be able to pay for things. Well, they don't need to steal because they have an extra $100 in their pocket. And they just so happen to potentially save somebody's life down the road.
And does the plasma that's collected from donors that are paid end up helping Canadians, or does it end up more on like a global market?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the big concerns coming out of primarily the union involved in collecting plasma in the old system. They argued that, well, if we could pay donors here, but then if we're going to sell it on the global market, then it doesn't do anything. That isn't the case because it has to stay here. And luckily, we are creating better infrastructure, one, both to collect the plasma, but also to create the therapies here as well. Because we used to collect plasma, send it to the US to turn it into therapies, and then import it back. So we've created almost a more vertically integrated system that one makes us more self-reliant, but also negates those concerns about people donating, thinking that they're going to be helping Canadians, and then it ends up elsewhere in the world.
And lastly, can you just explain the difference between actually donating blood and plasma, just for some of our viewers that might not be aware?
Yeah, so donating blood is rather straightforward. It's a relatively short process. Donating plasma is about 60 minutes, so 60 minutes to an hour and a half, so it's substantially longer.
Right.
It's where they separate the blood from the plasma, basically the red from the yellow in the simplest terms, and then they reintroduce the blood back into your body. And so because it can take longer, that is sometimes a bigger burden for donors because you have to take more time out of your day. And that is where even just $70 can make such a difference in terms of somebody's willingness to sit and stay in the chair. And that is, again, the path to a system where we are actually meeting some of our needs and helping patients whom, in many instances, plasma therapies are their only shot. And so that is largely the difference and some of the reasons why it's been so hard for us to become more self-sufficient historically.
Well, David, thank you for breaking that down for us. We
Not a
appreciate it.
problem.
Stay with us. We'll have more of today's top national and international headlines after the break. We'll be right back. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says peace proposals negotiated with U.S. officials could be finalized within days, after which American envoys would present them to Russia. Following 2 days of talks in Berlin, U.S. officials said Monday that roughly 90% of the outstanding issues between Ukraine and Russia have been resolved. However, despite the optimistic tone, it remains unclear whether the negotiations will bring an end to the war, particularly as Russia is not directly participating in the current talks. Speaking early today, Zelensky said the U.S. Congress is expected to vote on security guarantees and that he anticipates a finalized set of documents could be ready either today or tomorrow.
We are now in the midst of the most intense and focused negotiations for peace since the beginning of this war, for true lasting peace. And we are not talking about a pause or a temporary uncertain solution. We are working closely with partners to finally end this Russian war against Ukraine. That's why the talks these days are not only about ceasefire, but about security guarantees. This is not only about diplomacy, not only about physical security. It's also about making Russia finally learn to live by the rule of law. And it will only work if there is true accountability, if the punishment of the aggressor becomes inevitable. Yes, it's not easy, but it's not as difficult as some may try to portray it.
Rob Reiner's 32-year-old son, Nick Reiner, has been taken into custody after the death of his father and his wife, Michelle, a law enforcement official told the Associated Press on Monday. Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle Singer, were found dead Sunday at their home. Trump responded to the reported killing of a Hollywood cultural icon and his wife with a striking political attack on the victims. In a social media post, Trump said without evidence that Rob Reiner's death was due to his opposition to Trump and his policies. In Trump's words, quote, "The anger he caused others through his massive, unyielding, and incurable affliction with a mind-crippling disease known as the Trump derangement syndrome." Speaking later at an unrelated news conference in the Oval Office, Trump doubled down, saying that Reiner was very bad for our country.
A number of Republicans have denounced your statement on Truth Social after the murder of Rob Reiner. Do you stand by that post?
Well, I wasn't a fan of his at all. He was a deranged person as far as Trump is concerned. He said he knew it was false. In fact, it's the exact opposite, that I was a friend of Russia, controlled by Russia. You know, it was the Russia hoax. He was one of the people behind it. I think he hurt himself in career-wise. He became like a deranged person, Trump derangement syndrome. So I was not a fan of Rob Reiner at all in any way, shape, or form. I thought he was very bad for our country.
And U.S. President Donald Trump has filed a defamation lawsuit against the BBC, accusing the British broadcaster of misleadingly editing footage of a speech he delivered ahead of the January 6, 2021 riot at the U.S. Capitol. The lawsuit filed Monday alleges the BBC spliced together parts of Trump's remarks in a way that falsely suggested that he was directing supporters to storm the Capitol. The legal action opens an international front in Trump's ongoing battle with media organizations over coverage he says is inaccurate or unfair.
In a little while, you'll be seeing I'm suing the BBC for putting words in my mouth, literally. They put words in my mouth. They had me saying things that I never said coming out. I guess they used AI or something. So we'll be bringing that lawsuit. A lot of people are asking, when are you bringing that lawsuit? Even the media can't believe that one. They actually put terrible words in my mouth having to do with January 6th that I didn't say. And the beautiful words that I said, right? The beautiful words, talking about patriotism and all of the good things that I said, they didn't say that, but they put terrible words. They actually have me speaking with words that I never said, and they got caught because I believe somebody at BBC said, this is so bad, it has to be reported. That's called fake news. So we'll be filing that suit probably this afternoon or tomorrow morning.
And President Donald Trump has signed an executive order declaring fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction, a move that significantly expands the federal government's authority to combat the synthetic opioid responsible for tens of thousands of overdose deaths each year. The designation marks a shift in how the administration is framing the crisis, treating fentanyl not only as a public health emergency, but as a national security threat on par with chemical weapons.
Today, I'm taking one more step to protect Americans from the scourge of deadly fentanyl flooding into our country. With this historic executive order I will sign today, we're formally classifying fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction, which is what it is. No bomb does what this is doing. 200 to 300,000 people die every year that we know of. So we're formally classifying fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction.
And back at home, the Manitoba government is warning of a significantly larger than expected budget deficit. A mid-year fiscal update released Monday shows the province is now projecting a deficit of $1.6 billion, more than double the $794 million shortfall outlined in the spring budget. Provincial officials say the growing deficit is being driven by a combination of higher than anticipated spending pressures and weaker than expected revenues. Rising healthcare costs, inflation, and increased expenses tied to public services are all contributing factors.
Donald Trump's tariffs have had an impact on Manitoba's bottom line. But our fiscal path remains clear, and we're committed to balancing the budget. We've experienced the worst wildfire season in 30 years and one of the largest evacuation efforts in living memory. While Manitobans came together in inspiring ways to respond to these fires, there was a real fiscal cost to the provincial treasury. In addition, we're seeing the impact of a historic drought. Manitoba Hydro is reporting that water flows are tied for the second worst year on record. To put it mildly, it hasn't been this bad for over 80 years. When we released Budget 2025, we were projecting a deficit of $796 million. Today, with our second quarter report, we're projecting a deficit of $1.661 billion to year end. We will put contingencies in place to ensure that if we do continue to see those challenges next year, we will have budget prepared to respond to that. And so it's about preparation and ensuring that that preparation is in keeping with our broader target, which is ensuring we deliver on a balanced budget.
Opposition parties criticized the revised forecast, calling for greater accountability and clarity on how the government plans to rein in costs moving forward.
They have no plan to balance the budget other than continually saying they're going to balance the budget, but the proof is in the numbers and the facts. And they clearly show that this NDP government is driving this province into the ground and further.
The red carpet was rolled out for the premiere of the 5th season of Emily in Paris, drawing stars, fans, and industry attention to the French capital. But beyond the fashion and fanfare, the event also became a stage for big business conversations about the future of streaming. Speaking at the premiere, Netflix co-CEO Ted Sarandos addressed the company's newly announced deal with Warner Brothers, calling it a move that will ultimately benefit viewers. Sarandos said partnerships like this are about expanding choice, improving access to content, and giving audiences more value at a time when competition in the streaming landscape continues to intensify.
We're very excited. We think that the Warner Brothers films and series and HBO, all those products work better in our business model, and our business model works better with those films and series. So we think it's going to be great for consumers, really great for creators. We invest heavily in production, and then we intend to run those businesses exactly like they run today. So Warner Brothers movies coming out in cinema, then released through HBO and through their various output deals around the country, around the world, in the same way they are today. So we're very excited about it.
So for the viewers, for everyone, you think it's going to be a good thing to have all this amazing catalog?
Amazing. To have all these amazing things to watch in a place that it's easy to find with a good value. All the things that we've been successful at all along are only going to be better with Warner Brothers.
The Vatican has unveiled its nativity scene and lit the 25-meter Christmas tree towering above it in St. Peter's Square. A band, chorus, and dancers in traditional costumes from Italy's northernmost province performed for the occasion. It's part of Christmas season events that also will include a Christmas Eve Mass and the traditional address by the Pope on Christmas Day. Pope Leo did not attend the event, but earlier in the day denounced the anti-Semitic violence behind the Hanukkah massacre in Sydney, Australia. I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. For more news on demand, you can always visit our website at forumdailynews.ca and make sure to follow us on our social media handles on X and TikTok. You can also watch all of our commentary programming on the News Forum YouTube channel. Good night, Canada.